The Arabian Racehorse Podcast with Debbie Burt and Stephen Molyneux.
Hi, and welcome to another edition of the Arabian Racing Podcast. I'm joined today by Stephen Molyneux.
Hi there, Debbie. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Gary's abandoned us for today, so it's just me and you to review our last two races from Lingfield and Doncaster. But obviously they were handicaps, and for once we had two very close finishes, taking a photo to decide the result. So perhaps it's quite apt that we do have our Arrow resident handicapper on board today. I think mixed emotions for trainer Peter Hammersley, who was involved in both finishes. He got the rub of the green in one and not so much with the other. What did you make of the Lingfield race, Stephen, starting there?
Well, firstly, what do you mean for a change, a close finish? We've had plenty of close finishes over the years, but yeah, they were both very, very good races, weren't they? And starting with the Lingfield race, it's kind of the Lord giveth and the Lord taketh away for Peter Hammersley, wasn't it? He was perhaps a touch fortunate with Zayn Zyperian just getting the better of Kayak, who'd probably looked to have the race in safekeeping for much of the straight, but we know at Lingfield, particularly on the poly track, that the complexion can change inside the final furlong, and the horse just hanging towards the rail, which I've never felt is the best place to be on any all-weather track, really. It just seems slower for whatever reason, and the horse coming down the centre of the track always had the more momentum, so that was the case with Zayn Zyperian. But as we alluded to in the preview of the race, it was a victory that certainly wasn't going undeserved. The horse had been a victim of his own consistency, really. Come down a couple of pounds since his last run. Whether that made too much of a difference, I don't know. I think certainly Sean Levy being on board made a huge difference. He was the standout jockey in the race going into it, obviously a recent Group 1 winner. And going the extra yard almost to secure his services has paid dividends in the end. But a good result. And Kayak really lost nothing in defeat. He's a horse that you can have nothing but admiration for the way he's been campaigned. There's lots of complaints about not being enough racing. But Kayak has contested some races that have perhaps been beyond his pay grade. But he's always given his all, run from out the handicap. And this was a good opportunity for him. And so nearly got the job done.
He certainly did, and in fact, he lost out by a short head in the end. But as we discussed, Zayn Zyperian not winning out of turn at all, and I think you're absolutely right. Fabulous ride from Sean. He apparently has stated that he's keen to be chasing 100 career winners this year. So it's a shame we don't have Arabians included in that. Perhaps maybe we'll see that like you do have in the Emirates, but. We can hear from Sean now, actually, if we listen to what he said after the race.
Very good. Horse travelled brilliantly throughout. He's obviously an experienced type. Knew exactly what he was doing. Disappointed me when I turned in, when I went down from travelling to asking him to quicken. He put his head up and thought about it for a stride or two. But, after a couple of reminders, he put his head down and ran to line well. Won with a bit of hand in the end. So, no, delighted with him.
And... returning to our post-race comments, I also spoke to owner-breeder Paul Simmons.
My last win was 3 years ago, was with his brother Achilles, who I did so well racing with. And Zyperian, I think he just really deserved this win. He's been placed in all his starts since he went handicapping. He's done nothing wrong. And obviously, when he was dropped after his last third, we thought this was a perfect opportunity for him to get off the mark. And he had to work quite hard for it. Kayak gave him a good race, but I'm delighted he got up and Sean gave him a brilliant ride and brilliantly trained by Pete, of course.
Paul obviously delighted there, having been quite a long time between drinks with his winners, so understandable that he was pleased. Looking into the rest of the race, much improved from Al here there. I mean, he ran a cracker here, 5 or 6, 4 or 5 years ago at Lingfield when he was in one of those Sheikh Mansour apprentice races. And he actually got done on the line by, I think, horse of James Owens that day. But he's clearly shown that, even at 12 years of age, he's still got some ability left.
Yeah, he certainly has. And obviously one of those horses that missed 2020, just taking a bit of a time to come down the weights, rated, in his 80s at his peak back in 2016. But there's still plenty of life in him yet, judged on that run. Cheek pieces were back on, and yeah, it was a good third placing from him, leading home another old boy in Kay Clara. Sorry, old girl. She was probably unlucky. Missed the break quite badly, and it's probably been quite frustrating for Deleth Thomas. Obviously, she was withdrawn prior to her intended reappearance, and at her age of 10, she's clearly developed one or two ideas about the starting stall. So if they can be ironed out, then I'd say she can probably be competitive in the remaining 0 to 55, I think it is. I think her jockey also put up a couple of pounds overweight as well. So yeah, it was a good solid result. Even Gurko de Tonnel has shown a bit more. I've always felt that horse has got plenty of ability, and Duluth was one of the least exposed coming into the race and shown more than on debut. So yeah, really a competitive race, and there wasn't too much really looking down the whole list of 14 runners that you could classify as being bitterly disappointing.
Well, I don't know. I think we were both quite keen on Amy and Run the Risk, who'd run at Windsor, but then back at Lingfield where they'd run poorly. So the obvious conclusion to draw is that they're not so suited by the polytrack there, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're not unsuited by the all-weather. I think we've discussed that Lingfield is a little bit of a specialist course in some respects. Yeah,
I think certainly in the case of Amy, she's looked a little bit laboured in her run so far, or maybe not laboured, but green is probably the more pertinent point, and taking a bit of time to get going, and maybe she's one that would benefit from stronger handling or more experience. And Run the Risk was kind of harder to excuse. Yeah, I do agree. It was disappointing based on the way he ran it at Windsor. But yeah, if they were sort of getting behind at Lingfield, it was very difficult to make up too much ground. Kayak had made his move off the turn, and it was only Zane's Hyperion, the eventual winner, who ever threatened to make any impact.
And certainly pleased for Connections. They've, as we discussed, been very patient with him, and good to get a win on the board for Paul and his breeding. Obviously, he's quite established breeder now down in the south of England. And we move on now to our next handicap, which was the 0 to 75 Alcifa Beach, again over a mile and a quarter, this time at Doncaster at the weekend. And again, we had another photo with Pete Hamlers's runner, Altbari, this time losing out by a nose to Abcarry. Slightly more difficult for you to assess this time, Stephen, initially.
Yeah, it's not easy. I mean, they've pulled 5 lengths clear of Balkis, who's obviously unexposed in his own right, and Abcarry was having just the second start, which we've spoken long and hard about the merits of rating horses on the back of one run, and this is probably the most obvious example of not necessarily a horse making a mockery of me, but being able to win second time handicap debut up against more experienced sorts. I mean, it was a narrow win in the end. The horse obviously battled back pretty well. It looked for all the world as though Al Tabari had been produced with a well-timed challenge by Howard Cheng. Kind of felt preview in the race that third time was a good time to catch the horse based on what he did last year. And that was certainly the case, but he always travelled well off the pace. And I think the pace was quite key in this. Doncaster is one of the hardest tracks to make all of the running, and it did turn into a bit of an attritional contest. The faster they go, then the more the majority of the field are likely to struggle, and that was the case, and probably the reason why we saw enhanced distances right throughout the field. So from my perspective, from the handicapper's point of view, I'd probably take that into account and try and bring a lot of the field closer together than the bare margins. And horses like Falcon de Rock being beaten 14 lengths, Upstart Crow, they were Sahis, a recent winner as well. It's your gut feeling says that they're not as bad as that suggests, but you got to take that into account, take into account the races that are left for them in this season, and hopefully come up with a bunch of ratings that pleases everyone, which is obviously nigh on impossible.
Well, this one's certainly given you a bit of a head scratcher, if nothing else. I'm certainly glad I'm not in your shoes to be doing the ratings tomorrow. Yeah, I mean, it's superb performance from Altabari. I think he's a very brave little horse, and obviously Abcarry, at the end of the day, his pedigree suggests that this trip was within his compass. I think some of the other members of the family have been a little bit more backward, but obviously they perhaps wouldn't have been running in a 0 to 75 handicap, because obviously they've been starting off in France, where you're up against quite often much stiffer competition than obviously you would have found at Doncaster. I mean, his brother, he's a full brother to Handassa, who you will have seen win 2 of the Al Maktoum challenges over this distance at Maidan. But actually, Handassa was better over slightly further. All his other wins came over 2,100 metres. And a lot of the time on the all-weather. So it looks like this horse could be quite versatile as to surface and to the trip that he starts on.
Yeah, he does. Handassa was just a galloper, really. He had a very high knee action, and hence why he went so well on the artificial surfaces, particularly the dirt over in Dubai. So maybe conditions would have been quick enough for Ab Carey at Doncaster as well. So look, it's absolutely no mean feat to win and to battle back in the manner that he did. You know, Al-Tabari certainly headed him. But this horse found plenty, and he's obviously taken a bit of time, hasn't he? He's a 5-year-old now, having just his second career outing. So they've been patient with him. He's still an end tyre, presumably related to his pedigree, as you've alluded to. So they'll probably have another opportunity to run this season. He's unlikely to go up beyond 77, which would, probably harshly have to mean Al-Tabari's going up a few pounds as well, which is never ideal for a horse finishing second. But they did pull 5 lengths clear in the end of Balkis, who shaped well. And I thought Jarheads was the one that we alluded to with the pace. He was the one that set it, went off too quick, and he's probably shaped pretty well, finishing back in 5th place there.
And Jarheads, of course, is a half brother to the winner. This one's by No Risk Almori instead of Majani. James did say that he's had quite a few now out of the mare Ziva, who herself was fairly tricky to deal with. She was trained by Damien de Watchkent to win the Hatter International. But he did feel that Ab Carey probably had more scope than the others he'd had out of that mare, but they're all a little bit quirky. So it'll be interesting. He certainly looks like he's capable of progressing, even obviously with a penalty for winning. One of the horses which caught my eye was the 4th G1, again, putting in quite a decent performance, I thought. Yeah,
a horse again having a 3rd start of the year. I often find when you've got these smaller trainers who perhaps don't do it on the professional basis of a James Owen or a Phil Collington, that they do kind of run themselves into some sort of fitness, and that allied with a bit of a drop in weights means that G1 has refound some form. He's probably got a bit of scope to improve for new connections. So that was definitely a step back in the right direction for that horse in finishing 4th. And of the rest, I gave Autar a bit of a benefit of the doubt from the last run in that conditions race when he was well placed, but disappointing again in only managing 9th. And the 2 horses from the Chelmsford race, Sahis and Al Simsam, both emphatically failed to build on that. It was a better race at Doncaster, no doubt, so maybe a slightly lesser grade for them. And I know Thayer Athbar's only beaten 1 horse home again in the end, but I do maintain that horse has got more ability than he's shown so far. He's just seemed way too green, and in each of his races now he's made his move at probably the wrong times in the race, and he's going to be perhaps more one for next year, but another one that will probably be given a chance in the ratings on the back of that run. Yeah, and he was very slow out of the stalls, again alluding to what you're saying about greenness. I mean, the other thing is he's a very heavy topped horse. Yeah, it looks it, doesn't it? Yeah. And he's taken a long time to get into sort of race trim, as it were. And I think, possibly, although the ground was given as good, it was a scorching hot day at Doncaster. Possibly it was riding on the quicker side, albeit obviously they must have gone around with the going stick to give us that reading. But again, similar actually applies to Autar. Her improved run that you talked about in the conditions race, that was on softer ground. So it could just be that she found it a little bit too quick for her at the end of the day. Yeah, that's a feasible excuse, isn't it? But she's probably just struggling a bit as well with her rating, so she's likely to be given a chance. I'd say off the programme book off the top of my head, a lot of these horses are going to have just the one chance again this season. There might be one. I don't know. James was thinking of the Derby, wasn't he, for Sahis? Maybe that's on the back burner now. But yeah, a lot of these ratings will be aimed at giving horses at least one or two more opportunities for the rest of the season. And I think we also
much as we gave credit to Sean Levy in that last race, we ought to also give a bit of credit to Ross O'Ryan. He's now tying for first place in the ARH Jockeys Championship with Holly Doyle. Again, he delivered a winner right on the line there.
Yeah, the winners have been well spread around, haven't they? I was going to make mention last week that I think we'd had 8 separate winners prior to Holly Doyle making it 2. So I think, as I'm right in saying, they've only got 2 each, or and the rest of the winners have been spread around. But look, Howard Cheng did absolutely nothing wrong on the winner. On the runner-up, he produced Al Tabari with what he presumably thought was the ideal challenge from right out the back, and that pair clearly got on very well together. He's able to do lightweights, which Al Tabari has quite often run off. So, yeah, two good rides, and I suppose spare a thought for Dane O'Neill. I think he's yet to ride a winner this. Either he or Jim Crowley, whenever he's been available, they've not yet managed to land on the on what's turned out to be the first string. Obviously, they've ridden what's perceived to be the first string beforehand, but both searching for their first winners this season.
Yes, and I don't think you've got to go quite as far back as Murakib to find Jim Crowley's last UK Arabian winner, but it's certainly been a long time for him since he's been given the first pass of post in the blue and white here. But I guess that's also, we also have the problem at the moment of jockeys can only ride in one meeting at the moment, so yeah, that's a limitation.
I think Murakib would have paid for a few misses though for Jim, wouldn't he? Winning the Qatar race as he did, which is of course very nearly upon us, just a week or so away. And whether Jim will have a runner on a ride or not, I don't know. I suppose a lot will depend on whether Belizam can come over from France in that.
Well, absolutely, and of course we've got entries from Shadwell, from James Owen, and Phil Collington, so he could have a choice of several if they. Who knows who's going to show up at the moment with the UK travel situation? It's all a bit up in the air. But anyway, it's fingers crossed it'll be a race to savour. Anyway,
it certainly should be, judged on the entries. I know there'll be French trainers that'll be trying to move heaven and earth and be willing to fill out copious amounts of paperwork to get over here. So 400,000 reasons to make the trip over to Goodwood next week.
Yeah, you're not wrong there, Stephen. We'll be back to review that race next week once we've had declarations, and I think with any luck we'll be joined by Gary on that occasion as well. So thank you very much today.
No problem. Look forward to next week.
Absolutely, and we'll see you all next week. Thank you.